You know, it's pretty wild to think that in just over 100 years, the whole idea of war got completely flipped on its head. It went from what they used to call the sport of kings, this kind of limited, almost gentlemanly affair, to an all-out clash of entire nations, powered by factories and capable of killing on a scale nobody had ever seen before. So in this explainer, we're going to trace that brutal evolution, all the way from Napoleon's battlefields right up to the doorstep of World War I. To really get how much change, you got to go back in time. In the 18th century, guys like Prince Maurice of Saxony here basically saw war as total chaos. Maybe it was an art, sure, but it definitely wasn't a science. It was messy, unpredictable, fundamentally a thing without rules. And that whole mindset, it was about to be absolutely shattered. And this slide, man, it just lays it all out. The before and after in black and white. On one side, you've got old regime warfare, professional soldiers, fighting for a king's fairly limited goals. A lot of the time, it was more about clever moves and sieges, trying to avoid a big bloody battle. But what was coming was a completely different beast. Entire nations getting drafted for a total cause. The goal wasn't to outsmart the enemy anymore. It was to utterly annihilate them. I mean, this was a complete paradigm shift. So, what was the first domino to fall? Well, it was the French Revolution. And this wasn't just some political shuffle. No, it completely changed the answer to the questions, who fights, and maybe more importantly, why do they fight? War wasn't just the king's business anymore. Now, it was everybody's business. And the engine for this massive change was this radical new concept, the levée en masse, basically mass conscription. For the very first time, a state looked at its people and said, every single one of you has a duty to defend the nation. It directly tied war to this new idea of national identity, and it unlocked a pool of manpower that was just unthinkable before. And the result? Just look at that number, 600,000. Napoleon, using the power of this mobilized nation, could put an army of over 500,000 men on the field. The old kings, with their professional armies topping out at maybe 50, 100,000 if they were lucky, they just couldn't compete. Napoleon didn't just change tactics, he changed the very source of military power. So you can imagine, this new, gigantic style of warfare left everyone scrambling to figure it out. How did it work? Was it just pure chaos, or could you actually tame it? Was there a secret formula for winning? This kicked off a huge debate, led by two brilliant thinkers who watched Napoleon and came to very, very different conclusions. So, on one side, you've got Antoine Henri de Jomini. He looked at Napoleon's battles and saw science. He was convinced there were these fixed, almost geometric rules, a literal how-to guide for war. Follow the formula, you win. But then you have Karl von Clausewitz. He saw something way more complicated. To him, war wasn't some lab experiment. It was a messy human thing, filled with chance, psychology, and what he famously called friction, all the little things that go wrong. And believe me, this wasn't just some academic squabble. For the next 100 years, military academies would wrestle with these two totally opposite views. And this brings us to Clausewitz's absolute bombshell of an idea. He argued that war never, ever happens in a vacuum. It is always an extension of politics. It's just another tool a government uses to get what it wants. Now, that sounds simple, but it's incredibly profound. It means war should never be the goal itself. It has to be guided by a rational political purpose. He broke this down into something he called the remarkable trinity. He said every single war is this dynamic dance between three things. First, the raw passion and hatred of the people. Second, the element of chance and creativity that plays out in the military. And third, the rational, calculating, political goals of the government. To really understand a war, he said, you have to see how those three things are constantly pulling on each other. Right when the world was trying to get its head around this political and social revolution in warfare, a second, maybe even bigger revolution hits, the Industrial Revolution. This is the moment the factory and the assembly line were let loose on the battlefield. And that period in the mid-1800s, that was the hinge. In these four conflicts, all this new industrial tech got its first real test drive on a massive scale. And the results? They were horrifyingly effective. These wars proved, without a doubt, that the age of Napoleon was over. So what are we talking about here? Well, you've got breech-loading rifles so soldiers can fire way faster, from cover, and more accurately. You've got new artillery that can kill you from miles away. You've got railroads moving huge armies at speeds that were just science fiction a few years earlier, and the telegraph giving commanders instant communication. And on the seas, ironclad warships made entire navies of wooden ships obsolete, practically overnight. Poof. And the result of all this new tech? Well, it was a tactical earthquake. Trying to charge across a field in those old, dense Napoleonic formations, that was now literally suicidal. A couple of guys in a trench with modern rifles could mow down a much larger attacking force. For the first time, really, defense had this huge technological edge over offense, and it was a direct, chilling preview of the trenches and the stalemate of World War I. This quote from General Sherman from the American Civil War just nails the new reality. With glorious charges being a recipe for disaster, war became this grim, ugly math problem of attrition. It wasn't about who had the most brilliant general anymore. It was about who had the bigger factories and who could afford to throw more bodies into the meat grinder. The sheer industrialized horror of these wars, it created a huge backlash. The world kind of recoiled. And for the first time, people and nations started to seriously think, okay, if we can't stop this new kind of war, maybe we can at least try to contain it with some rules. So this became the question for a whole new generation of thinkers and diplomats. Was it actually possible to make this industrialized slaughter just a little bit less inhumane? Could you really apply what they called the progress of civilization to something as savage as war? And two big ideas emerged from this. You had the Geneva model, which was all about protecting people who were out of the fight, the wounded, prisoners, civilians. Then you had the Hague model, which was focused on tying the hands of the fighters themselves, regulating what weapons they could use and what tactics were out of bounds. And this wasn't just talk, it led to a whole series of actual landmark treaties. You can see the progression here. It starts with rules for war at sea in 56, then the big one, the First Geneva Convention in 64 to protect wounded soldiers, then a declaration to ban exploding bullets, and finally, the Hague Conventions at the turn of the century, trying to ban things like poison gas. This was the birth of the laws of war as we know them today. So from the citizen soldier to the machine gun, the 19th century created this terrifying new kind of war. But in its shadow, it also created the very first real attempts to control it. And that set up this tension that basically defines our modern world, a constant arms race between the technology that kills and the laws that try to restrain it. And it leaves us with this really unsettling question, a question they started asking back then and one we're still asking today. As our power to destroy gets more and more efficient, can our humanity, our rules, ever really keep pace?